Well, welcome everyone to episode 10 of the Real Profit, Real Perspective podcast. How do I build my team? I'm Connor Malatesta, managing partner at Markoff and Malatesta CPAs, and I am joined by my favorite financial advisor in the whole entire world, Ryan Bannister, who's the owner of One Up Advisors. Ryan, how you doing today?
I'm awesome, dude. Especially after that introduction. I always look forward to that part.
I am so jonesed up on caffeine right now between a cup of coffee and the additional Tim Hortons hot chocolate. Shout out to Tim Hortons, who sponsors my Thursdays. That I'm actually feeling pretty good today.
Sugar and caffeine.
There is no better way to ensure that your afternoon is going to be brutal when all that wears off.
Oh yeah, you know it. You know it.
That caffeine sugar crash is going to just be probably hitting right when I have a 5 o'clock meeting, and it just is going to make me for the absolute best person to talk to later today. So, can you believe that this is our episode 10?
Dude, we need to pat ourselves on the back here. Great
So
job.
for those of you listening on Spotify, we are patting ourselves on the back. On YouTube, this just seems really weird that we announced what you easily saw that we just did, but we don't split out recordings into Spotify and YouTube because that would be way too much work to duplicate 40, 50-minute episodes into both audio and video. So we thought by this point, I've had some clients that have actually had some questions that are directly relevant today, and I know it's something that I have been actively involved in over the last month. I know you're working on, and that is, how do you build a team? How do you go from the solo, the one, the person who starts everything, and actually build that out into a functioning, cohesive unit? And that's what today's topic is. So Ryan, I know you have been working lately on kind of building out your team and going through that. And I know that's something that you talk about with a whole lot of your content creator clients. So what's somebody listening to this who's just thinking, man, I think I need to get some help, or I'm not sure what's going on. What's your kind of go-to there? What's this experience been for you as you've been building stuff out?
Yeah, and I go back to the episodes we did earlier on for where you're at with your business, like solo entrepreneur or Papa, I'm a real business now. So when you're making that,
Love that title.
I know, right? I had to throw that in there. So I think it goes back to sort of overall like business strategy, if you want to look at it from that way. Like the way I see businesses, you can start as a solo and make it just fine for a while until the business starts coming in. You start eventually getting to the point where you are going to be personally at capacity, or you no longer can handle all of the work plus like admin operations and sales and all the other aspects of your business because you wear all the hats. So
Wouldn't you say it comes down to the fact that no matter how much money you have or how little money you have, we all unfortunately only have 24 hours in a day?
we all have the same time in a day.
I keep
And
I keep looking for those pocket dimensions, get some hyperbolic time chamber, training
yeah,
going on, and it just doesn't. I've had no success yet. Still only got those 24 hours in a day.
let me know if you find a breakthrough on that.
I'll keep looking.
But for now, we have to supplement ourselves with the assistance of other people or computers potentially, whatever you want to look into on that. But that's, ideally the transition I think everyone has to make at some point, or dramatic insert here, your business is going to fail eventually or die out at some point because it's only tied to you. So I think that's a decision you don't necessarily have to make early on, but I think you need that vision of where you want things to go. And like for me specifically, that has changed because when I first started, I saw myself growing this thing till I'm at capacity and staying kind of solo with some outsourced help. And as I've gone through the past 3 years of my business, that has definitely changed to where I want to build at least up to a small kind of boutique firm with, maybe 3 to 4 people that are providing support on me for operations and admin, all that. So where am I in that journey right now? Well, I currently have one part-time contractor who's helping me on the bookkeeping side of the firm. So that, in and of itself felt like a big step, honestly, because that, aside from other work I'd done with people that worked with me in previous jobs, I didn't have any management experience or anything in that regard. So, it's been a nice change to like finally have somebody here I'm not alone anymore. you know?
No management experience. I don't know what you're talking about. You managed me so well when we were working at the audit firm together, when we were both trapped in the same place, sitting there going, all right, well, what are we going to work on now?
I know, right?
One of these
Yeah.
things. So how did you identify that you wanted slash needed additional help for the bookkeeping services when you were going in and making that initial assessment, trying to figure out, okay, what's going on, what do I want to do? How did you settle on hiring someone or contracting with someone to handle that part of the work? What was kind of your thought process through that, and how did that turn out? And I'm going to go ahead and put my follow-up question here. How did the realities of setting up this relationship match
Mhm.
up with how you thought it was going to be before you had sealed the deal, so to speak?
Yeah, that's such a great question, man. Like when I first started even thinking about this, I think I don't think I waited too long, but I was right at that point where I needed some assistance because all of the work just kept piling up. And, the hours at that point that I was working weren't sustainable to be able to continue on in this fashion. Or so at that point I started looking at it and said, okay, I need some help. How do I go about this? Well, one, I think the most important part of that is going to be the financials. Like, can you afford to hire this person? And luckily, this person was at a rate where, we both are finding it useful. Like, you know, she's perfectly happy, I'm perfectly happy, and that's a great relationship. So, um, I think the financial side of it is going to be really important, but also the logistics of it and balancing those things. So what comes first? I think that's going to be a big question that we kind of dive into, especially when we look at hiring bigger teams and going into multiple employees and contractors. So I think this gets at kind of the bare bones of it, of like, do you hire before you grow, or do you react to that growth and say, I'm running from behind now, I need assistance? So I like to think I balance that like fairly well. And to answer your question, I think it has gone probably 95% how I thought it would. The 5% that hasn't has been on my end, where now that I've got support for a part of this operation, I'm realizing other areas where I'm still the bottleneck and need to figure out like new processes, or reconfiguring processes to either, automate myself out of it, like using a software to cut out portions where I'm either not doing something or I'm very slow to do something, like requesting bank statements from clients to do reconciliations, or for transactions we have to categorize for them. You know, things that I am reaching out for currently that someone else can definitely do that stuff. So
You
that's
mean when you go through the usual distraction of I need to request this, but I've also had half a dozen things hit at the same time, and
exactly.
now the person is waiting on, you know, my I'm going to use employee as a catch-all phrase, but my employee, my team member is waiting on me to do something, and I have these other things going on, and so they end up stuck twiddling their thumbs until I can go and do the part that I need to, and it just turns into this constantly repeated mess. Something kind of like
100%.
something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, that kind of goes back to what we've talked about in the past of, I don't know, like holding yourself accountable or like just self-awareness where you can then realize that you are still the bottleneck of your business. And that's, I think, spawned my change in plans to hire more people eventually. So right now I'm planning, like if my projections come true here, that I will make my first employee hire within the next year, which would be fantastic. But we'll see how that pans out when we
So that ends up
continue
being a
on.
hell of a milestone. So you're definitely fond of saying, you know, identify the things that only you can do and get help for the rest. So what I'm kind of
Yep.
picking up from this is that this is less of a an observed lesson in clients that you've talked to and more of an actual lesson that you have picked up as you have been looking at how you are running your own operations.
Yeah, dude. And you saying it in that way too also reminds me, I was listening to a podcast, I think maybe 6 months or at some point ago, and it was talking about the same exact thing. So one tip I picked up from that and just in talking to other people and that have done this is, you know, the first step I think that you could do is find or make a list of things that you hate doing or that you know you're the bottleneck in, or like you'd just love to get it off your plate. And then from there, figure out of that, like you just mentioned, you know, what are the things that only you can do? Like for me, part of that is compliance work. You know, I'm not necessarily amped up to do regulatory tasks for my business, but you know, the reality is that at this point only I can do that. You know, I could get some support, but I'm still the chief compliance officer of my business, and that's not going anywhere anytime soon. So, what are other areas that I can take off my plate? Well, the categorization and bookkeeping work side of the firm was very ripe for that, and also looking to do that for some of the financial planning tasks as well in the future. It's very similar. So I think finding things like that you know you can train somebody else to do, and you would love to get off your plate.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that echoes a lot of what my clients have gone through. So when you had mentioned that one of the considerations was financial, right? And can you afford the person or the service or the contractor that you're looking to do? So how did you, when you were kind of making this initial step here to really building out your team, how did you assess whether or not you could afford it?
Yeah, that for me was pretty simple, and I think that's where I got a little bit lucky. Maybe is all of my clients were priced to where I could bring her in and it's still profitable. So mixed a little bit of luck with maybe some foresight. I don't know, but I think you know maybe that could change across industries. As you like look to hire a contractor or an employee, you know, that's I think going to be really important to look at is whether it's profitable for you to bring that person in. Like on a very simple basis, if they work an hour or two on this project, are you going to be losing money or not?
Yeah, basically, and I know because we both dabble in bookkeeping a little bit, but I'm assuming that your profit calculation basically looked at, because if I'm remembering correctly, I believe you also use fixed monthly pricing,
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
Recurring. Yeah, you're not an hourly biller,
Nope. Flat
which
fee.
which I'm sure pricing and all that should be. Let me make a mental note that we should probably have a whole how do we come up with pricing episode later. Although that varies so wildly. That both varies wildly from industry to industry and also fundamentally kind of remains the same for a lot of
That's what I
things.
was thinking. Yeah.
It's weird where it's yeah, a lot of things look really different, but then also it kind of doesn't.
Still kind of the same
But
concepts.
like most things, a lot of business is the same fundamentals over and over and over and over and over again, no matter how you try to dress it up to look, snazzy. But before I ramble too much, I'm assuming I tend to like if you let me get started, we're gonna end up talking about greyhound dog racing if we're not careful, and in the context of how would you price booking booking bets on that.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at profitability for your jobs, right? You've got a fixed recurring monthly fee on the project, and you have an hourly rate that you're paying the person to do the work. And so basically, at a minimum, so long as how much you have to pay them to work on the project is less than how much you build for said project, that means you're making money, right?
Right. And I think you can look at it from two different angles. So hear me out on this, and I'll let you know. I want your thoughts on this too.
If
So
you're if you're full of shit, I'll let you know.
yeah. So I think one angle is from cash flow only. Like if you're billing, I don't know, $200 a month for a project, and the contractor, they would then have to spend 10 hours or less at $20 an hour for it to be technically like cash flow positive, I guess, at that point.
Hmm.
So that was the first way I looked at it, is like, can I literally afford this cash flow wise? And hearkening, I guess, back to our accounting, like public accounting days when we would do things more on a time basis, I think that's where you get more theoretical on it. And maybe this applies to industries that bill by the hour, like some accounting firms or mechanics or construction companies or things like that. I don't know. Then you get to the point where you look at specific job costing data and say, like, if this person spends this amount of time and I spend this amount of time, like, is it still a profitable job? Am I making sense on that?
Yeah,
I don't think I'm
it's
wording that quite right.
I think I know what you're kind of alluding to with this one. Now it plays into a lot, I think, with contractors, but to start at a basic level, if you're paying somebody hourly and then billing hourly for what they're doing, and you're billing more than they cost you, it is really hard to lose money on what they're doing because you're getting paid X amount, you're paying them Y amount, and your profit is X minus Y per
Right.
hour. And a lot of businesses, that's how they make their money, is on the labor. They pay somebody $20 an hour, bill them out at 65. They're making $45 an hour on everything that they do, and that covers all the rest of their overhead and stuff like that. Where things get both theoretical and, depending on what you're doing, it can get a little funky, and we play with this a little bit because I have a mix of part-time people who get paid hourly and also full-time professionals. Is when you have fixed fee engagements, let's start with a lot of contract work, for example, contractors, where you've got a job that you have won, you have submitted a bid for it, or you gave them a quote for X amount, and now you're going to do that, and you're basically only going to get X amount. Kind of a similar to your kind of recurring monthly, not taking timing of cash flows into account, just at a real high level here, because all of this is one of those few areas where, depending on your industry, blah blah blah, everything gets a little funkier. But at a basic level, when you've got that kind of fixed revenue, but your variable cost, that's where the hours become really important and where you have the opportunity to lose money. Where things get can get weird. Public accounting firms use a metric called realized rate and utilization and a few other ones. But what it basically is looking at your fixed cost salaried people through the lens of hourly work, which on the one hand, I understand where they are coming from, and it is a profitability metric. On the other hand, when you no longer have people that get paid hourly, but they have a fixed salary, ultimately they could, let's say you got somebody that's getting paid 5 grand a month, right? And they work really inefficiently and they're only able to bring in $5,000 worth of work an entire month, right? So they're working 40 hours a week, 4 weeks in a month, 160 working hours. You've basically made, I don't know, $3 or $4 an hour on them. No, that's way off. Um, it's look, I had early morning networking, so let me think through this real quick. 10, like maybe $30 an hour, something like that. Where it may not be where you want it, but you're not losing money because you've still had them working on enough revenue where they have technically paid for themselves. Now you may look at the hourly rate and say, I want to make $70 an hour off of what they're doing. If I take how long they worked into the projects that I assign them to, they're making, $30 an hour, something like that. We're not doing well. And I understand that kind of thought process, but it's not the same as if you have somebody who is actually being paid hourly, because you can have them work more. They're not getting overtime, and you've pulled more money in. And that's where I'm going to use this as actually a segue into when you're looking at hiring full employees, right?
Yep.
We have a mix of part-time help and full-time professionals. And so one of the first things I look at is, in the aggregate, am I bringing in more revenue than my payroll is costing me? In the aggregate. At a minimum, I want to be break even. Now, when I say minimum, I mean that is the absolute bare minimum, is I better not be losing money. So when you're looking to make that first full-time hire, right? Now you've made the change, and I need to talk about kind of how I went through the same process you did, but we're just going to talk numbers right now because we're CPAs and that's what we do. But it basically looked into, okay, I'm going to pay somebody X amount a month. So long as I have them working on Y amount of revenue that is significantly higher than what it's costing, I'm okay. Things are fine. If I've got somebody who's costing me 5 grand a month and they're doing $10,000 a month worth of work, I, to a certain extent, don't really care how long it's taking them to do that. I may have an individual project that on an hourly basis, it looks like I lost money on. I didn't really, because my costs are fixed. Right. And
Right.
that's where you get into things like office people or your professionals that are doing things, or a lot of support stuff, where you can look at it. When you look at the one project and those hours that are involved, it looks totally messed up. But really, the whole point is our aggregate payroll less than what we're using them to generate? And the first kind of fundamental lesson when you're going to build out a team and you're hiring somebody, all right? And here is a fundamental for every business out there: is every person that you bring on, whether it's a contractor, whether it's a service provider, or whether it's an employee, you need to make money off of them in some way, shape, or form. It may not be direct, it may be indirect. Accountants usually are indirect. You don't hire an accounting team to directly generate revenue, but you hire an accounting team to give you information that allows you to make better decisions and generate more revenue as a whole. The first fundamental lesson of hiring anyone, regardless of what it is you have to make money off of them. Otherwise, why did you bring them on in the first place? There are easier ways to lose money. That's rule number one. And I have found when we get into, we could have a whole other like, actual management of people and stuff like that, but I have set the kind of the ground expectations with my teams of, look, I have to make money off of you or you don't have a job, because then it's a net loss and you're not just putting your position at risk, you are actually risking the livelihoods of everybody else in the organization. We're a little bit larger than you are. In total, we've got 13, 14, 15 people. I forget mostly because sometimes I don't include me and Matt in those numbers. But that's kind of the core fundamental, and that's why honestly, if I have anyone, thankfully I haven't really had to have a conversation hit this level, but if I have somebody who's not performing, I have no issue saying you have to step up or you will no longer have a position, because I will not tolerate them to risk everybody else's jobs and basically sacrifice the many for the one in that manner, because ultimately my role as the person in charge is to manage everything and make sure that all of that works well and we keep going. Better one person, one low performer is let go than multiple people end up losing because we go insolvent, etc. That kind of thing. Now, to start at all the way to the beginning, because that was a long discussion on basically how do you go over the numbers in hiring someone. Similar to you, I probably hired my first person a year later than I should have. Being totally honest, my first full-time hire was in summer 2024, and honestly with the way things were going, I should have hired somebody full-time at any point in that 12-month period up to that. What really tipped me off that I needed additional help was going back to, like you said, I just didn't have enough hours to do everything that needed to, and I was basically half-assing everything. I didn't
Right.
have really, most of my projects were behind. I could never get caught up. It was a constant. I can't work on business development because I've got these other projects to do. I've got this one messed up project has then messed up all these other ones. And it was a constant foobar, really, where I finally said I need to pick somebody up. My first was my mother, who worked for me part time. And we will, in a future episode, go into the unique management challenges that hiring your mother makes you have to deal with. Now, to her credit, my poor mother being my first real helper, I had no clue what the hell I was doing. I had no structure. I had no process. I didn't really know how to properly. It was, oh my God, it was terrible. It was one of those that I look back now and go, "Whoo, she should have quit." I was not a good manager
If
at
she
that
didn't
time.
love you, you know.
Oh, there, look, I don't want to confess that there were points where we were almost both tearing up because of it and made each other cry. What I am saying is there were some periods that were very emotionally taxing because things weren't
Yeah.
going well and I didn't know how to handle the situation. I probably shouldn't confess that in a recording that's going to go into the internet, but we're here for that real perspective. So when I start to bloviate about, how amazing we are, just keep that in mind. Once I, what really happened from that was an understanding of, when you're building that team, the first thing I looked at was, what is the easiest stuff to have somebody else handle? Sales, I couldn't give out to somebody else. I couldn't just hand off that process. Similar to you, I looked at what's the easiest work that I can hand off to somebody else that I don't have to do, and that was a lot of bookkeeping work. What that has grown from us is from one part-time person doing bookkeeping to four part-times and two full-times doing accounting work, and having, this sounds a lot more built out than we really are right now, but having more systematized processes for how we do our work. I say that because I was up 2 hours last night writing process narratives for what we need to do in general and stuff like that, because my team was going, hey, I've got a lot of confusion here on kind of how I'm supposed to be tackling my day. And I went, I'm not surprised. I have nothing written down for how you guys should be doing stuff.
Yeah, and you showed that to me. I thought it was really interesting. So tell the listeners more about that, because I know we like to hone in on when we say words like processes or systems, like what
Yeah.
that actually is.
So this was a very straight to the point 7-step thing of, okay, for those of you that are doing ongoing accounting work, so bookkeeping work for clients, what do you do every day? It's literally titled Daily Cadence, where it's basically a series of about 7 steps of from when you log in to work on things. Check your email first, look for client notifications that have come through from our project management system, then work on the clients that we have, where every month that goes by we have work to do. And if you see that the client has answered questions, provided documentation, kind of done anything, prioritize those ones first, and then work on the remaining of your other assigned tasks. Then work on any of our weird or our standalone projects where we're doing, just accounting for a particular time period. Work on those next through the day. If you get through that, reach out to somebody else on the team to see what else you can help with. And if you get through everything and we have nothing to do, basically, congratulations, you've got the rest of the day off because that's it. But
Yay.
it just clearly laid out in an organized manner. Here is how I want you to approach every working day. Now, that 7 steps is the culmination of the last 5 years of me working on this stuff. So there's about, based on my average working hours, is about 14,000. Well, if we throw in our time spent working as the auditor, is probably close to 20,000 hours into those 7 steps of,
Yep.
here's how to approach your day. Here's what I want you to do. And that's the first. There's two important lessons that I want anyone listening to this when they're looking at building out their team, right? And these are whether you've got one person or you've got 10. First is understand, what are you going to have them do that's going to make you money? Oftentimes, you're going to start by getting somebody. If you're a contractor, you're going to hire somebody to help you with parts of the project so that you can get more jobs done in less of your time. Take a 10-hour project. If it's 5 of your man hours, 5 hours for somebody else, you could actually complete 2 jobs over the course of a day instead of just doing that one job. You're making less per project, but overall over the course of the day, you could have doubled your revenue because now you can just get more done. So first, have an understanding of when you're hiring or picking up this person, this contract or whatever, what are they doing for you that's making you money? Have a plan for how they're going to make you money. We picked people up to do the compliance work, or the compliance, I mean bookkeeping work, that was very easy to train somebody up on how to do, so that those projects could continue to have progress made while we are doing business development and all the other stuff that only we can do. Going back to your thing of, focus on the things that only you can do. Then you have to be prepared for that person that you're picking up to have no fucking clue what it is you want them to do if you do not have a written down process of, this is what you're going to do. So when I say process, I mean it's literally instructions on, this is what you're going to do. You're going to do A, then you're going to do B, you're going to do C, you're going to do D. How detailed those are going to correlate with how complicated the work you're giving them to do is, but you need to have a plan for, how does this person that you're picking up that does not have as much knowledge as you do know what you want them to do every day they show up for work.
Right.
We have probably all worked at places where you show up and go, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be working on today. I show up to work and it is a toss up on what it is my boss is going to tell me to do. I'm pretty certain we have all been there
Oh
in
yeah.
some form or another. And what that really is symptomatic of is a lack of clear process for, here's how to tackle your day. Here's what I want you to do. Here's what the expectations are. Here's the projects, et cetera, so that they can then go, oh yeah, I got to go do this. I'll do this, then this, and then they can get through the day knowing what you want them to do. That's the biggest I spent weeks having to build out a project management system from scratch when I decided to pick up two part-time bookkeepers and realized I had an impending deadline of suddenly having three people doing projects for me, and I had no way to tell them how to do those projects.
Right.
And so I had to build out processes from scratch. Now, those were definitely rough processes. They look nothing like what we've got now, but you start with something. You start with something. It's not going to be perfect. If you're lucky, it'll be decent. But then you do it, you put it into play, the person comes on, they start doing the job, and you immediately suddenly figure out, yeah, all right, none of either these things are working how I thought they were going to. Here's the other things where nothing is going how I thought it was going to. I thought this made a bunch of sense in my head, but it turns out that what I said is gibberish to people who aren't me. Now let me go retool everything that I have done up. And you kind of go through this iterative process until you finally have a system where your people, whether you've got one person, 10, 100, have an understanding of their day to day. What are they supposed to do? So the first one's make sure you understand how you're going to make money off of them, and the second one is make sure you get something in place ahead of time to have them know what the hell it is that they're going to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, you bringing that up rang a bell in my head too from a book I read recently. It's called The E-Myth, and it's a book from the 90s, I think. Mid 90s it was first written, but it's been revisited over the years and really good, man. I would recommend it to really anybody listening, and it kind of harped on what you were just saying of it, almost building out your business as if you were going to franchise it. Like that's what they reference in the book. And he specifically mentions McDonald's, the author. And, McDonald's has these essentially perfect like processes in place. So where a franchise owner can buy their business and they have the checklists and steps for every employee in any job to go in, and you just pick it up and you go. So, whether or not you want to franchise your business, you still can build it that way. So when you hire somebody, they know without a shadow of a doubt, essentially, what they are supposed to be doing. So, I mean, that's pretty theoretical. It's like you said, at first try, that will be decent if you're lucky. So, it's a process over years, but
I mean, say what you want about McDonald's food quality, but the fact that a McDonald's in the US ends up having the same type of food or a consistent taste to a McDonald's anywhere else on the planet is this sounds really stupid to say in the context of McDonald's, but almost a miracle. I mean, it is
yeah.
amazing to have things figured out like that for that level of consistency. And as you were saying that, I was actually thinking as kind of an additional step, because I can see someone listening to this going, okay, I get that to pick up somebody to my team, I need to make sure I have a plan for how I'm going to make money off of them, and how we're going to have process. And usually you build out a team in kind of a reverse order of emergencies of what are the easiest yet most time consuming things that you can move off of yourself so that somebody else can work on, so that that can operate in parallel with what you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it has taken me almost a good year at this point to free up enough of my time where the projects that we have going on don't require, it still requires a lot of my attention, but not as much personal attention as it did before, where the next thing I focused on was, okay, the business needs more assistance in advertising and marketing and stuff like that. We've got really good kind of local presence in the Wake Forest area. I've got pretty good presence here in the Port Huron area, but in terms of our actual online presence and from a marketing standpoint, we don't have a lot. And I haven't really had the time or really the understanding of how to pull in an outside marketer to work in conjunction with what we've got going on, because I know I'm not a marketing person. I have worked with a website person to put the website together, and I've, over the course of a year, putting the firm's website got kind of better and better. But then I went, okay, I know that for a lot of social media stuff and all that, it's not my bag. I got to go find somebody who has the skills that I don't have. I need to understand enough of what they're doing to hold them accountable to what they say they're going to do, but I need to find somebody who specializes in this stuff. Because one question that I have had clients ask is, how do I identify somebody to hire or to pick up? The short answer really is that, to a certain extent, it is a crapshoot at times. Resumes, work product, things like that only go so far until you put someone into play. A lot of that comes from starting with what you know. So if you're hiring somebody core to your business, right? So when we hire people to do the core parts of the bookkeeping work, for example, I know you and I know from experience how to read a resume for someone that works in our field and digest and understand whether this is a good resume or a bad one based on, schooling, additional certs, their work experience, what they say they've done, their ability to communicate, their writing quality. We know from experience how to gauge that resume. Now, would I know how to fully gauge the resume of, say, a master electrician? Probably not. I'm not an electrician, but if you're an electrical company looking to hire electricians, really somebody there has the requisite knowledge to in that particular discipline hire somebody and know what you're looking at. I think that's something that trips up a whole lot of people is, well, how do I know if they're good or not? If they're doing the parts to help you do what you need in that the core part of the business, you'll know from experience once you start seeing those things. And for the other parts, you just have to kind of, honest to God, it comes down to kind of working with them, seeing how things perform. And hiring is an expensive process, which sucks. There's always the risk that you're going to have to get rid of a person or a firm or a service provider and find somebody else. The important part is, as you go through this process, every time you have a new person that, if you move away from your core competency into other areas, you have enough understanding to hold them accountable to what they say they're going to do. So if you've got this salesperson that comes in and says, "I've worked with 20 different contractors and I've generated $10 billion in sales for them and blah blah blah, and I'm the greatest salesman on the planet." First off, if you're a small business, you should be asking yourself, what the hell is this dude doing talking to me if he's sold all this? Because that doesn't track. But even if he is legit, then you go, okay, then I'm going to hold you to that, and I'm expecting that you're going to be able to perform. And it kind of goes back to the accountability episode that we did, holding them accountable and holding yourself accountable. As you then pull in other service providers, other professionals, it really comes into just an identifying of, now that you've built out and freed up your time and your core competency, what are the things that the business needs the most that you are the worst at? Some businesses finally hit the point where they can pull in salespeople because whoever the owner is not the greatest at sales. They get decent because, again, when you're a solo entrepreneur in a new business, you don't have the luxury of being bad at sales. But you get enough, now finally you have the resources where you go, it's really important and I'm really bad at it. I need somebody to help me out here. For us, it's been marketing. And so I now work with the marketing company and kind of make them educate me on what they're doing, and I do a lot of my own homework as well so that I don't have to be an expert, but I can at least judge the results of what they're doing to see whether or not they're holding up their end of the bargain. And really,
Right.
as you build out a team, whether it's an internal hire, a contractor, anything like that, it really kind of comes down to that process of, when you're talking to somebody, everybody's going to make promises they can do all these things. If they can then follow through, then you're good. If not, you're going to have unfortunately, you're going to have a learning lesson for the future of what to look out for, better questions to ask people, how to gauge if someone's trying to bullshit you or not. And you just kind of build out and pick the people for the things that you need, kind of in list of priority of what is our biggest emergency. And you just kind of go from there. Then you go, okay, I need not just one person to assist with the core part of the business. I need 3 more. Okay, now how am I going to make money off of them? They're going to do this. I know I'm going to be able to, do twice as many jobs over the course of a month. So, I'm going to pick these up and allow to do these. And unfortunately, we don't really have time to get into the detailed discussion on just the economics of hiring someone. kind of wanted to keep this a little more high level, but it really comes into if you pick up somebody, a lot of people will look at that yearly salary cost and balk at that. They'll be like, "Oh my God, this person's going to cost me $70,000." Well, first off, it's not really $70,000. It's 6,000 ish a month. Second, you're not just going to stay steady over the next 12 months when you hire this person. When you bring them on, within 30 days, you should already have a bunch of changes happening because you have additional man hours to put to things. So it's not a 12-month commitment, really. It's a 2 to 3 month commitment of what is this going to look like? How is it going to affect my short term? Can I handle, an additional 12th of their salary over the next month based on the amount of money we've got, our expenses, and then how am I going to use them to generate more sales going forward? And so then the
Right.
idea, you have your kind of everything matched up at that point. You know how you're going to make money off of them. You know that you're not getting ready to shell out $100,000. It's only X dollars per month, and you're going to use that time. You basically have that 30-day window. If they're paid weekly, you're only looking at every week. If say they're paid twice a month, you have a 2 week period to put them to use to do stuff to free up your time to do other things before you even pay them the first time. And it's more of that kind of month commitment is what really becomes important and how you're going to take advantage of them over the next 4 weeks from when you hire them in the first place. You know, free up all this other time. You can do other business development, pull in more jobs, et cetera, that kind of thing. And that process, that cycle just repeats every time you pick up somebody else. You pick up somebody to support them to answer the phone so you don't have to. Okay, you're not answering the phones, they're feeding leads to you. You can focus on the other things that you need to. That same thing, like you said, focus on the stuff that only you can do. And really, the process of building a team is kind of like chipping away at a stone of all the stuff around. If you've got a diamond encased in rock, really building out a team is the process of chiseling away at the rock surrounding the diamond, where the diamond is only the stuff that you can do, right? When you're a CPA, it's signing tax returns, issuing audit reports, overseeing the work, talking to clients, providing advisory services. But I can then outsource a lot of the basic stuff to my team. If doctors have nurses and physicians assistants to handle a lot of the stuff that they don't need to. Same thing for your business. Contractors have their field guys, then you have supervisors, so that then the person calling the shots could be back in the office and managing everything. And you're kind of
Yep.
chiseling away at all of the extra stuff until you finally are at that point where you go, these are the things that only I can handle. Okay, now that I'm only handling these things, well, then we get into our second fun discussion, which is how do you really set up the business to operate without you?
Yeah, and that's kind of where my head was going too, as far as like the employees go. Once you've, made that first hire, or like for you, you're on to 4 part-timers and a couple full-timers. So one question that's sticking out to me is, how do you know when to hire next from like your first to your second? Like, how are you gauging the capacity for those people, and like on a project basis, or, how
Yeah.
do you kind of handle that?
So funny enough, the answer is going to sound similar to when I hired the first person, which is, are we ever in a situation where it doesn't seem like we can get caught up? I mean, that's kind of your final red flag of you're hurtling towards problems, which is it seems that even with people working well and efficiently, you're never caught up on things, which means you don't really have a whole lot of slack in your I hate to use business speak like this, but in your production pipeline. If
Yeah.
somebody goes out sick or something happens, you're screwed because now you've got to get all this work done with less people. The second one also comes into just looking. So for us, it makes it a whole lot easier when you look at the nature of recurring work. Again, do I have enough recurring work or enough basically profit is what you're looking at to afford over the short term taking on this additional cost to get somebody brought up to speed to do other things. If I'm picking up another full-time person, which ultimately purely comes down to my sales ability, the more work we have come in, the faster I hire. If I suddenly pick up $20,000 worth of monthly work next week, I would probably be reaching out to my recruiter and saying, "Find me somebody else," because we need to keep this going. And so I know, bring in 20,000 a month, I can afford to pay 5 to 10 grand out of that. That's our profit, like we talked about earlier. There we go. And it's for us, it's those two considerations on the recurring side. The For our tax team, it becomes a consideration on how many returns do we have to do, what's the average hourly workload on that, and how many man hours do we have for everyone, and then how did the previous season go? Was it a catastrophe and everyone was working way too much, or were things pretty comfortable? And then we know as we add these, we may have to pick up somebody else. And then in that context, as well as also the consideration of, because we are a full integrated firm, how does that track with our recurring monthly cash flows? We don't want to get things out of whack where we run into short-term cash problems because we have too much payroll. We could have $1 million a year from now in tax work. But if the payroll to get all that done costs more than we're pulling in, then the next 6 months, now I got a problem. And then that's where you have that kind of disconnect. And so do we wait to hire until closer to that period, or do we focus our sales on recurring things like that? So the answer is you're growing and building really gets into this repeated process of looking for weaknesses in what's going on with the work. Do things feel like a crisis? Are we really unable to onboard new projects? Or things constantly falling behind? And then kind of looking at how is that playing into our normal steady rhythm of things. It really, I had a discussion with a client earlier this week where I said, do you guys kind of seem like you've got some slack in what you're doing, or are you, constantly, it seems like there's always something and there's no catch up? And he said, there's a lot of this when you get in the paperwork. A lot of times we don't feel we can really get caught up. I said, well, you can afford the person right now. This will free up time from your more expensive people, so that you're not at such a risk of, turnover and burnout. Because if you think it's bad having, 3 people maxed out, imagine the workload of 3 with only 2, and then only 1. And then if everybody gets burned out, you're still stuck with those obligations. So, go ahead and do that. And that's really my litmus test is, again, we have the luxury of recurring monthly work. So a lot of times it makes it really easy. We pick up a client, we know each month pretty much what's kind of going on there. When you don't have that, it's a little more difficult, but you're looking at, on average, how are your sales doing? And then what do you kind of do in terms of that capacity? I know I rambled a little bit, but hopefully that answered that question.
I think so, man. This one was very, very high level. I think there's so much we can also get into on this. Like, as we've explored the episode, I think
it's one of those I've been sitting here going, oh God, I have forgotten to talk about this and what you're going to do in the plan. I mean, because it is hiring, it at times does get very industry specific for what you really need. Most importantly, I mean, it has a lot of the fundamentals, but I mean, trying to pack all of this into 50 minutes, it really, if you're listening to this and trying to think of getting through that first hire or two, it really just kind of comes down to, what's your 30 to 60 day plan for what you're going to have them do, and do you have enough money in the bank to kind of afford that cost until they get up and running? If you're making $500 a month in profit and that's all you've got to live on right now, then you have no, and I say you have no slack. Sometimes situations like that ironically become where you kind of need to hire the most to free up your time to do things like sales that are the most important. But that's not the kind of advice I would give out as a blanket generalization, because that very much is individual situation specific on playing around with running a loss for a bit to pick somebody up and things like that. I wouldn't want somebody to go, we're kind of running even. I'm going to go hire this person because they said, everything's a catastrophe and I ran out of money and what the hell, guys. It's very, that part, you gotta be careful there. We can't be, because we're kind of keep this high level enough for both of the solo runners as well as the more established businesses. That is where it gets real tricky.
Right. Yeah. And that's my main takeaway as well from this one. There's financial questions to ask, there's logistical questions to ask, and finding the balance of those is where you're going to kind of strike gold on that one, right? Like you have to kind of weigh your other priorities, whether you've got enough time and financial runway to hire them a little early and train them up before the work gets there,
Hmm.
or are you willing to react a bit after growth and kind of run from behind a little bit till they get up and going.
If I had to really boil down in my experience what I've seen with businesses, generally the newer businesses that are smaller are going to hire reactively
Right.
because you for starters don't really have, unless it's you've run multiple businesses, you don't have the perspective or the foresight just through sheer experience to identify I need to hire right now. So
Yep.
it's going to be, if you're new, you're probably going to be doing a reactive hire to begin with. That's what you did, that's what I did, that's what I've seen other businesses do, where things get so bad you finally bite the bullet and do it. And then once you're more established, each kind of subsequent hire it generally becomes less and less reactive because you also have the resources generated from that first person to now start to float the second.
Yep.
And then the person after that, you've got the resources from the first two to then float the third, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's why large organizations are able to more regularly hire without having to be as worried on, are we, is bringing on an additional $5,000 a month in payroll going to break us? They go, yeah, we know from seasonality we got to pick up, four more people for this. So, yeah, a payroll is going to go up another 20,000, but we don't really care.
Yeah.
So that's, if you're small, you're going to be reactive. I really don't think there's any way around that because you oftentimes just lack the perspective. And then the bigger you get, the more you have going on, the more you're able to more proactively pick people up.
Yeah. It's almost a snowball effect.
It really is. It's one of those weird ones where the beginning is the hardest because you've got to deal with the risk of the new person, get the processes in place. But once you figure out that first one, you do now have a repeatable system for everybody else that you're gonna bring on.
Yep.
Even if their job responsibilities are different, you now still have an understanding of a system that's got to have in place, how to communicate with the person, keep everyone accountable, all that stuff, and it gets easier. It's that first one's that's the worst.
Yep.
But I think with that, we can't really get any beat this dead horse anymore, get any more diesel. We're pushing an hour here. I think our average time is starting to creep up with these episodes. So if anyone's got any specific questions on hiring, or you need more detailed advice, or you're just not sure, you can always leave a comment, shoot us a message. If you're on Spotify, please follow and like and leave a comment. And if you're watching this on YouTube, obligatory like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you in the next episode, episode 11. Always be learning. We'll see you then.